This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. Today's edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were bringing you lasted for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. We were glad you're here on a Friday afternoon before the weekend. I am Cesar Delgado. I am your host for Today on Today. I will be talking about the fertilizer markets for today's program with Curt Miller from United Prairie in Central Illinois. We are going to have a conversation about the commodities markets with Toni Dunker from Advanced Trading. Otherwise, this is your rural news sponsored by AgriGold. Eggs prices are currently downturned to the bird flu, however, in Louisiana. There is a new virus in the bird flock in a farm in the south. On Tuesday, the wheat's presentation at the LaSalle County Farm Bureau. The host of the presentation was Dr. Aaron Hanger from the University of Illinois Extension. I will be there for Tuesday at the Farm Bureau in Ottawa, Illinois. Finally, next week will be warm weather in central Illinois. However, there were few of tornadoes in Tazewell County, Woodford County, McLean County, Illinois. There was a tornado warning in Coles County, Illinois. The National Weather Service declared in central Illinois as a result of the severe weather on Wednesday afternoon. That is your rural news for this afternoon. This is your commodities markets for this afternoon, sponsored by Kyle Bumstead. Corn futures is down at the exchange of the markets. March corn is down at 3 to 6 cents. May corn is down at 3 to 6 cents. July corn is down at 5 to 10 cents. September corn is down at 3 to 5 cents. March beans is down at 3 to 4 cents. May beans are down at 5 to 9 cents. July beans are down at 4 to 6 cents. November beans are down at 4 to 6 cents. Chicago wheat is mixed for today. Chicago May wheat is down at 3 to 6 cents. Chicago July wheat is up at 3 to 6 cents. Chicago wheat is up at 3 4/4. Let's see what happens in the livestock markets on this afternoon. April cattle is down at 5 to 4 cents. June cattle is down at 3 5/4. August cattle is down at 3 to 6 cents. May feeder cattle is down for today at 3 to 4 cents. July feeder cattle is down at 3 to 6 cents. August feeder is down at 3 to 6 cents. April hogs is down at 3 to 5 cents. June hogs is down at 3 to 6 cents. August hogs is down at 8 to 5 cents. Cash cattle trim is down at 18. 70 cash cattle weights is 202 for today. This time for cash hogs markets. Cash hogs markets are 89.42 for today from Iowa and Minnesota markets. This has been your commodities markets update for this afternoon. I'm joining with Curt Miller from United Prairie in Central Illinois. We were talking about the fertilizer markets for today's program. Hey, Curt, how are you today?
I'm good, Caesar. How are you this morning?
Great, thanks. Let's discuss about the fertilizer markets for right now. What is the potash prices?
Well, Caesar, when you look at potash today, um, I like to look when I'm talking pricing. I like to look at not the price per ton, but really how many bushels of corn it takes to buy that crop nutrient. So when you look at today's market, it's around 110 bushels to buy a ton of potash. I've been tracking these numbers for many years, actually, to be honest, 18 years. So 110 bushels to buy a ton is today's market. The low over the last 5 years is $65, or excuse me, 65 bushels to buy a ton of potash, and the high is 166 bushels to buy a ton of potash. That's where the potash market is today. It is the average is 110 bushels to buy a ton, and today's market's at 118. So it's above the 5 year average.
How is it with inflation and supply chain issue?
So on potash right now, supply is in good shape. If we switch gears and look at phosphate, whether you're talking MAP, DAP, or triple, the phosphate supply is not in very good shape. I think we have enough to get through season, but grower demand has shrunk due to grain prices being down.
Curt Miller, do you recommend for these prices with the tariffs from Canada?
So, so to elaborate on that a little bit, Caesar, when you look at potash and the tariffs, how they're affecting the grower today, to look at some numbers. So Canada provides roughly 7 million tons of potash, or 85% of the U.S. demand, and we feel that way north of 80%. I'd say today's numbers probably closer to 90% of the tons for spring are locked in and taken care of for the spring season. Only roughly 10% could be affected by by the tariffs today. Um, but when you look at that, I just don't think it's going to affect the market, for this spring season. If the tariffs stay in place till, late June, early July, where we're potentially looking at buying tons for fall, then it's going to affect that price, for the customer.
Do you have any concerns about that for next couple of weeks until the planting season?
I do not. When you look at, we've got a little bit of work done in the field last week, actually quite a bit of work done in the field last week. And I think we'll get in the field again some here over the weekend in a few areas. But supply for getting through spring looks we look to be in good shape.
What is your final thoughts on the planting intention report with fertilizer markets?
I do think corn acres are going to be up. I mean, there's some people saying 94 million, there's others saying 95.4 million acres of corn to be planted this spring. When you like I mentioned earlier, we got quite a bit of field work done last week, and I've noticed a lot of anhydrous tracks in cornstalk fields. So that tells me there's going to be a fair amount of corn on corn acres as we head into spring season. The date that we get started planting will also dictate how many acres get planted, obviously.
How is nitrogen cost for right now? Kurt.
So again, going back to how many bushels to buy a ton, when you look at the 5-year average, let's talk anhydrous first. It's at 173 bushels to buy a ton. You look at today's market, it's just above the 5-year average at 176 bushels to buy a ton. So I mean, anhydrous is in. I mean, it's in the ballpark as far as being fair to the grower. When you look at UAN, the average is 88 bushels to buy a ton for UAN, but when you look at today's market, we're like at 110 to 111 bushels to buy a ton. So again, a little bit above the 5-year average, but I, with the weak fall that we had last year, we just didn't get as much fall ammonia on. I can't help but think there's going to be a lot more UAN used this spring season. The big run of ammonia we had last week helped take some of that burden away. But I think the UAN demand is going to be very strong for this spring season.
Yeah, it was pretty dry last fall.
It was dry last fall until we got to the time to put on ammonia, like that first, the 1st of November time frame, and then it stayed extremely wet in this area here.
Of course. Thanks, Kurt.
Hey, thank you for inviting me to visit with you.
This is Kurt Miller from the United Prairie on Back Roads of Illinois. We will have a conversation about the planting intention report on commodities markets, stock market with Toni Dunker from Advanced Trading for today. Hi, Toni. How are you?
We're good, Caesar. We're getting blown around on the western side of Illinois.
What was your thoughts on the planting intention report from the USDA?
Well, when we get to March 31st, they're going to roll these numbers out from what they have gathered the first couple of weeks of March. And I feel like we're going to see a very strong corn acreage expected planting number. I think they put out 94 million as a base starting point for corn acres there in February with the Outlook report. I feel pretty strong that farmers are going to want to plant corn. I just had a conversation with a new person that I had been visiting with, and he mentioned to me, he said, depending on the spring, if it's working well, we'll just keep planting corn, and we'll even plant corn on corn. And I feel like that's going to happen in a lot of places, weather dependent. So that number on the corn acres, is it 94? Is it 95? Is it 96 million acres of corn? So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. Will we plant less beans than what anyone's expecting? That's a good question as well. I think a lot of it comes down to the weather. It feels like on the western side of the state that most producers are pretty well ready to go. And we've even, seen anhydrous going on the last couple of weeks. There's talk of some beans in the ground already. So, things are starting to happen over this way. And I believe next week they'll really start to happen.
Do you have some concerns about the beans markets because of low beans acreage for this spring?
Caesar, I feel like beans can move pretty easy, fast, depending on what comes out. And the thing is, we have an ample supply of beans domestically. and worldwide. And we know Brazil is hitting the market right now with their beans, and it's a record harvest. So the supply of beans is really good. It just depends on what we come up with as far as bean usage and how those beans would get utilized. I think that's probably more important at this point to see how we would use beans, especially given the impact that tariffs can have on the bean market. Um, if we would shift that bean acreage even lower than what they were initially looking at as far as bean acres go, that could be supportive to the market if we come up with a way to use the beans. We all know that, China has not been in our market taking very many beans, and that obviously has been hard on the bean price. Do beans need to rally? Not if we're not using them.
Of course, it's a great story about the soybean futures. However, we will see.
But we will see on March 31st at 11 o'clock in the morning what they come out with as far as those expected acres.
Do you have any questions about the fundamental on the beans markets for next few weeks?
So, I feel like until we get some better direction as far as biofuels go, and how we're going to utilize these beans domestically, the fundamental picture just remains very puzzling at best. We've got to figure out how we're going to use beans in order to, give some support to the bean price. I certainly don't want to give up hope that beans can't rally, because if we would have something come into play where we're going to crush even more beans than what we have been crushing, then good for us and good for the American farmer. We can grow beans.
What about the technical side to it?
Yeah, beans have been in a downtrending market. Um, And when we know we lose this export business going forward to Brazil. Their beans are hitting the markets. They're shipping a record amount of beans in the month of March out of Brazil. Um, and so when we bring that all back, you go look at a chart on beans, and it's definitely in a downtrending market. Unlike corn. Corn to me, has been uptrending, although we've pulled it back. We've trimmed it back about 40 cents in the last couple of weeks. Just February 19th, we had new crop December corn at 479, and today we're setting at 450. And technically, corn looks a little different on the charts than what beans look. Beans, they definitely need some help. Um, we've got to hold some of these lows that we've put in the bean market on the charts. And if we don't, then we probably go to the next ratchet on down on beans. On corn, we had a very sideways type of trend this week, very quiet market in December corn. Old crop corn led by the May, rallied up 7 cents yesterday, took a lot of that back today on Friday. And so, you know, old crop corn is really being supported by exports. New crop corn is being pressured by that potential acreage number. It came out at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Could you talk a little bit about the hogs markets for right now?
Yeah, so we did have fund money flowing into the hog market earlier in the year, and they have decided to flip their long position and back that up a little bit. So we've seen money flowing back out of the hog market. But the interesting thing is that cash hogs have remained, resilient, even though the futures market backed off. And when you go look at the cash hog market, we're still trading in the upper 80s, 89.5. The lean hog index is up there and has continued to maintain that level, which has been above where the futures market has believed it should be. And I think part of that has been product value. If you look at the value of hams have been supportive. They should be this time of the year. We're going into that Easter time frame. And if you're going to have a ham market, it really should be during that time frame where it's very supportive. Hams have been offsetting a little bit of bellies going lower. But the nice part about bellies is, we don't have big numbers in cold storage when you look at the bellies inventory. And so that's a little bit supportive longer term. It sure would be nice to see those summer month hogs get back to over $1. We really pulled those summer month hogs back lower and kind of took the good out of this hog market that we were seeing earlier in the year. Earlier in the year, it was looking pretty profitable, and it gave producers a really good opportunity to be hedging. Since earlier in the year, we've backed this price up, and the prices just aren't quite as attractive as what they were. So it just tells the hog producers that they need to continue to stay vigilant when it comes to hedging when the prices get attractive. You've got to stay in there and continue to market ahead.
How is demands for the hogs for right now with trade deficit?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Caesar. The thing you have to remember is we export about 25% of our product out of this country, and that is a very important component to our hog prices. With the tariffs that are coming into play and the potential of what's down the road, on that April 2nd timeframe with reciprocal tariffs, it's going to be tricky footing for the hog market for sure. Even though we may feel like we have some health challenges in hogs, demand is going to be the driver of this market. And so, hopefully we can get resolution to tariffs early in the going and not be burdened by those tariffs for long if they are, continued in place.
Do you have any final thoughts on the corn acreage for the planting intention report?
I do feel like we're going to plant a lot of acres of corn. I mean, you look across the spectrum. I don't know if that number comes in at 96 million acres, but I would tell you, depending on the weather, we're going to plant a lot of corn acres.
Thanks, Toni.
Thank you.
This is Toni Dunker from Advanced Trading. Thanks to Curt Miller from United Prairie and Toni Dunker from Advanced Trading on today's program. This been Back Roads of Illinois. I am Cesar Delgado. You have a great day.